Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, my apologies for the delay. What we're actually finding is a lot of these sessions tend to go longer than what we expect them to go for. As you know, we've been going around now different urban centers having these information sessions. We started off on Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday morning at J. Narayan College in Suva. Then yesterday we were in Singatoka, and in the afternoon we were in Nasori. We've just finished from Nandi, probably broken all the speed limits to get here on time. And then of course now we are here with you, and then after this we go into Mba. Tomorrow morning we go to Sabu, and then in the afternoon in Lambasa. We're trying to get all the teachers before the actual term starts. That's why we're trying to squeeze in as many schools as possible. The purpose of this gathering is, of course, to give you as much information as possible regarding the civil service reforms, also specifically regarding various issues such as contracts, etc. And one of the reasons why we're also holding these sessions is essentially to be completely upfront with you as to what is happening. In particular, given the fact that there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of deliberate misinformation out there. There's perhaps a lot of misunderstanding about what is happening with the reforms and why they are taking place. The way that we actually do run these sessions is that I'll take you through some of the key issues, and then Jane Curran, who's here with us, who's also the Director of the Civil Service Reform Management Unit, will then take you through some of the other the other slides I should say, in particular talking specifically about how the job evaluation exercise was actually conducted, what are the factors that were taken into consideration, OMRS, which is different to the job evaluation exercise. Then I'll come back with a few other slides. And then we actually open it up for questions. If you have any questions, you have any queries, then we actually address that in the open question and answer session. Please don't hesitate to ask any question whatsoever. And then once we finish that, I'd also like to take the opportunity to very quickly take you through the budget. The budget announced in 2017-2018, which actually has an impact on you, both individually as a citizen, but also in respect of you as teachers in terms of getting that knowledge base. Is that acceptable to all of you? Okay. Very quickly go through this. Please tell me if I am too fast. I don't think I'll be too slow. And then we can go through this. Now, there's a lot of talk about retirement. What is the retirement age? The retirement age in Fiji used to be 60 until the first coup in 1987, in particular the second coup. Rambuka reduced the retirement age from 60 to 55. There are various theories as to why he did it. Some people speculate and say the reason why he did it was because he wanted to get rid of a group of people, whether based on ethnicity or whatever it was, because of political reasons. So he reduced the retirement age from 60 to 55 in 1987. That continued at 55 till 2000. And then in 2000, Garase then put up the retirement age to 60. Various theories about that as to why he did that. And some say it's because he wanted some people who were politically aligned to stay within the system. That's why they increased it to 60. I can tell you factually why we did it. We did it in 2007. We reduced it to 55. So firstly, the myth is that it's only this government's done it. That's the actual history of it. We did it because 69.4% of the entire Fijian population today is below the age of 40. Those of you who are over the age of 40 are in the minority in this country, including myself. So people below the age of 40, those of you are the majority. So we need to be able to take care of these people also. As you see in the recent statistics, whilst employment in Fiji actually has decreased, it's gone down to around about 5.6%, youth unemployment relatively still remains higher than the actual unemployment rate overall in the country. So that's actually the history of the retirement age. When we reduced it in 2007 to 55, one of the unions took us to court to challenge the ability of government to reduce the retirement age to 55. It went up to High Court, and Court of Appeal actually held that under the actual law we could have the ability to actually reduce the retirement age. So that's the history of retirement age, put into perspective. Next please. Now, What are the objectives of the civil service reforms? It's not just about increasing salaries. It's not just about including, having OMRS, which we'll go into later on. But it's also generally about better supervision, fair and transparent decision making, ensuring that we have what we call positive disciplinary guidelines, positive disciplinary reinforcement, and also to ensure that the constitutional authority of the permanent secretary is fully implemented. Those of you who have signed your contracts would see that the contract is between you and the permanent secretary. It's not between you and the government of Fiji, it's between you and the permanent secretary, because the permanent secretary under the constitution is the one who is responsible for the administrative and the financial management of each of the ministries. So therefore the contract is between you and the permanent secretary. If tomorrow a permanent secretary changes, your contract is still valid because it's not under Mr. So-and-so, it's between the PS. So the position actually continues and your contract actually continues. Now also, the part of the reform essentially is to attract and retain good people, to provide better learning environment. One of the things that we'll talk to you about is, for example, things like teacher-student ratios and how that actually needs to increase. And that's some of the areas regarding civil service reform that we want to talk to you about, in particular the teaching fraternity. Of course, we want to be, overall, from government's objective, we want to be more responsive to the members of the public. Now, there are a lot of fundamental issues with the administrative arm of the Ministry of Education. There are a number of ways in which the Ministry of Education actually runs administratively that we are actually not happy about. And you will see that we will actually talk to you about how some of the goof-ups they've made. And some of you may actually agree with it. We've also seen, not just even prior to this, when I went around for the budget consultations, there seems to be a bit of a disparity between the teaching cadre of the staff of the Ministry of Education staff and, for example, the administrative officers. I've seen in some areas wherever there is a district education officers or the senior education officers come around, you see the teachers scampering around and making sure that the garland that they put on them is quite nice and large. The morning teas are good because it may actually affect your ability to get the right transfer or get a promotion. We want to get rid of that. That is not the way to run a ministry, in particular with a professional group of people. So we are doing what we call a desegregation between the administrative arm and the professional teaching arm of the Ministry of Education. And that's what it requires. So we believe that the Ministry of Education needs to engender an environment where you feel professionally very safe, you feel professionally that you can grow. That's their core business. And the reason why we want them to focus on the core business is because, one of the key core business, is because if you are in the right environment, then you will be delivering for us our main target client. And our main target client is approximately 220,000 Fijians who you teach. That's the core business of the Ministry of Education. So that's part and parcel of being responsive to members of the public. Next, please. Okay, so we have the OMRS. Now, the OMRS was introduced in January 2016, and I'll talk specifically about your ministry itself, but generally some broader guidelines, and that's to ensure that only the knowledge, experience, skills, and abilities required for the job are considered in the assessment. Not your ethnicity, not your religion, not who you know, not just because the guy who is now sitting in the head office, you and him work together as deputy head teacher and head teacher. Those things should not matter. OMRS is there to ensure that when you actually apply for a job, you actually get treated equally with everybody else. Now, it also means that we must have greater transparency. We have found the Ministry of Education actually has not been very good at implementing OMRS. In fact, when OMRS was introduced, Ministry of Education wrote to us and said, can we be an exception? They did not want to implement OMRS. And in fact, they came very late to the party. So one of the things we are doing now with OMRS going forward, if you are going to apply for a job that is below J grade, then the people in the panel, when you have 3 people on the panel, at least one of them has to be from outside the Ministry of Education. If you're going to apply for a job that's J and above, you must have at least one from the Ministry of Education, one from outside the Ministry of Education, in other words, the rest of the civil service, and one completely from outside the civil service, the senior positions. So you need to have a completely independent body. Many of the other ministries are already implementing this. Some ministries like, Ministry of Industry and Trade and Economy, they have people from outside that actually sit on the panel, because we don't want this sort of close collusion, because everybody needs to be assessed under a predetermined set of determinants to be able to point score in respect of how you're going to perform. And of course, all people who sit on the panel need to be trained and understand the principles of OMRS. About 6 months ago, the Ministry of Economy, they had one position that they said, we recommend this person for appointment. And I found out that one of the people on the panel, in fact, did not go for training. So I rejected that. And I said, you have to go through the process again, because the person who actually sat on the panel does not know about OMRS. So you cannot actually make a recommendation specifically. So they had to redo it. Now, of course, we have, again, many of you may not know this, is that we already have a review procedure. So if you go for a job interview, and under OMRS, and assuming that all these lovely people in this line went for a job, and this lady here felt aggrieved by the process, she can actually appeal. When she does not appeal to the senior education officer or the district education officer or the permanent secretary, she appeals directly to the PSC. Okay? She appeals directly to the PSC, nobody else has to know about it. When she appeals to the PSC, then it's paper-based. She does not have to go and physically stand there and make a submission. It's paper-based, and nobody else needs to know about it. Then the PSC will actually carry out a review. If they believe that what she has stated is correct, that the procedure was not followed, they will write to the PS and say, redo this position again. Sorry, what is your name? Vanessa. They won't say Miss Vanessa actually complained to us. Her name will never come up, because she may of course be an applicant again. So it's completely independent. That review process is up and running. Some people have already actually applied. I think, how many have we had, Jane? So we have a number of appeals, 4 have been upheld. So that review process is up and running. So that's what you have, in fact, as a safeguard. Now, the question may be asked, why is it going to PSC? Because remember, your contract of employment is not with PSC. Your contract of employment is between you and the permanent secretary. The PSC, under the Constitution, no longer has any say in your promotion, demotion, appointment, etc. That's done through the ministry. But the only reason why, in this particular instance where you have an appeal process, is because the permanent secretary is responsible for it. And the permanent secretary is appointed by the PSC. The permanent secretary, the PSC can fire the permanent secretary if something untoward has happened. Because his contract, or any PS's contract, is with the PSC. So if there has been non-adherence of the procedure, it's essentially a complaint against the PS. So that's why it's sent to the PSC. If the PSC upholds the review and says, yes, Ms. Vanessa has actually merit, when they write back to the PSC, to the PS, they say, redo this. And that's what actually happens. So that's the procedure in that respect. Now, however, the PSC cannot say, well, we believe Ms. Vanessa should be appointed for the position. Because PSC has got no powers to do that. The PSC essentially says, redo it. And they go through OMRS. Okay? Sorry, just go back. Yeah, exactly, there's no position. Okay, did I miss a slide? No, okay. Okay, ministry issues open merit. Like I said, the ministry wanted to be exempt and say we don't want to implement OMRS. And of course then there was passive resistance in respect of, by the ministry, they kind of stole things. Then we of course offered to give them technical assistance. The ministry eventually agreed in June 2016. Some of you may have been appointed to the OMRS. There are some questions about the way it was implemented. But now again, as we said, it's very late implementation, and we're now addressing those issues with them. Next, please. Now, Jane will take you through this in more detail. The salaries have all increased, and we shall take you through the various grades. The salaries have all increased. Now, those positions where the salaries have exceeded more than 15%, those positions will actually be advertised. You need to apply for that. And anybody can apply for that. You know, the old system has been generally in the civil service, and it also does exist in the Ministry of Education, that the person who's been longer in the system, say for 15 years, believes they have a greater right to the promotion as opposed to the person who's been there for 8 years. That's kind of been the culture in the civil service. But the OMRS means that anybody can apply as long as they meet the basic criteria, which Jane will actually talk about too. So it's open to anybody. Because as we know, that some teachers who may have been there for 15 years may be spending half their time in the grog bowl. It does happen. Some of them may be coming to school late. But whereas you may have a teacher who's been there for 5 or 7 years, but they're real high flyers. They're very good teachers. So the system needs to recognize that. And that's what it's there for. This is why when a position has had a salary increase of more than 15%, as you'll see some positions, you'll see the pay rise has been about 40 or 50%. Quite substantial. So, of course, we need to ensure that the people who actually appointed on that have been appointed on merit. I've had so many people who have complained to me, saying to me, that teacher was appointed because he was or she was Itoke. He or she was appointed because they're Indo-Fijian. He or she was appointed because they go to the same church. Or those two were in high school together, now he's been transferred to head office, that's why they got the job. That's a fact. A lot of people do complain about that. So under OMRS, if the 15% increase has been given to that particular position, you get appointed under OMRS, nobody can question your appointment. So it builds confidence within the system. It gives authority to you if you have been appointed under that position. That's the whole purpose of it. Yep. Now, of course, there are people who have been, because these jobs have not been advertised as yet. Am I going to your slide? This is my slide. This is my slide. Now, because these positions have not been advertised as yet, so those of you who got those positions, you are acting. So you are now getting 95% of the new salary, as the general orders state. You get 95% of whatever that substantive position actually attracts. So there are some people who have jumped, for example, from $32,000 to $50,000. So they are now getting 95% of $50,000. And that will continue until that position is actually advertised. We go through the OMRS system, and that person is appointed or somebody else is appointed to that position. And I know your question would be, what if I don't get the position I'm acting at the moment? And we'll give you the answer to that. There is also going to be, generally, there's going to be a stage plan. So by September, we should start advertising. And as Jane will also tell you, when those positions that are to be advertised, when they're advertised, they'll also tell you what is the criteria for selection. So it's all transparent, it's all open. And we expect, for example, the job advertisements to go up in October, for positions to be taken up possibly by April. We do not want people to be appointed during the term. We don't want people who are retiring to retire during the term. So if, for example, I'm turning 55 in the middle of the term, my actual tenure should go till the end of the term to cause least disruption. Similarly, we want people to be posted preferably at the beginning of the term or the end of the term, not being disrupted in the middle of the term. Sometimes there can be extenuating circumstances, but generally that's what we want. That's the direction that we are going in. So again, knowing previous issues, changes have been made to ensure a proper, transparent process in place for the jobs. And the oversight, even though MOE, Ministry of Education, will be doing this, CSRMU will be actually having an oversight on it. So for example, there's one particular agency that comes under my responsibility through the Ministry of Economy. I was not very happy about some of the internal workings of that organization. So now every single job recommendation that they do make, I get the CSRMU unit to actually go through it and vet it again, to make sure they went through the process. And only then we actually get it approved. Next, please. Okay, some of you may have been the subject of discipline. As you know, the Ministry of Education set up an internal staff discipline board. We actually, unfortunately, weren't aware of it. The moment we were aware of it or became aware of it, we disbanded it. You would have seen it was in the, I think it was the media some months back. We got rid of that board. So there are people, for example, who were disciplined under that. Some people are suspended, some people are demoted. And when we said because it was illegal, we said those people have a right to appeal. So some people actually have been reinstated where the process was unconstitutional, and the ministry is to review all processes and ensure that it's in line with the new guidelines. There's a new guideline for discipline. Now, this guideline for discipline is actually very different. It's available on the website, you can all see that. Firstly, the discipline guideline must be positive reinforcement also, positive discipline. What do I mean by that? I know, for example, some of you double up as counselors, as student counselors. Now, you're not necessarily trained in that area, but you're doing that because there's a requirement. There's a lack of professional counselors. Now, assuming that this young man here who's recording what I'm saying, he is a student counselor. He then gets disciplined because maybe he's given some type of advice that was something that he should not have done, or he's done something that he has not done something that he should have done, right? Now, if maybe the parent complains or the child complains, student complains, and they said, yes, this teacher has done something wrong in his role as a counselor. Now, the reason why he may have done something wrong is not because he deliberately did it, it's perhaps because he does not have the caliber to do or execute that decision, because he has not had the training as a counselor. So you cannot fault him per se, but you can say the positive discipline outcome would be we need to send him for training, to get counseling training, because he's got a passion, he wants to counsel students, he likes doing that. Let's send him for 3 months training, we need to do that. So that's what we call positive discipline mechanisms. Of course, if you're going to molest a child, you spend half your time in the grog bowl, it's a different story. If you're smoking cigarettes on the premises, there's a different story. But there's some instances, obviously, where you can have what you call positive discipline. You must have natural justice. So if you see the discipline guideline, the new ones, I don't know how many of you have seen it, it's actually on the website already, Jane? Yeah, it's already on the website. Now, that also says that if, for example, there's a complaint against this teacher, then he should be given the right to respond. When he gives a response, you make a decision, you need to tell him why you arrived at that decision. Okay, so that's what you call principle of natural justice. Of course, there needs to be improvements in supervision and management. Training needs to be made available, specific sessions organized for education early July, August. We also want to hear from you in respect of how to improve communication of available training. You'll hear me talk later on about what we call the 7 days of 7 student-free days, which we've now introduced, which will actually get enforced from next year. And of course, there has been, of course, I know many of you get circulars at times, and the Ministry of Education says, you must attend this training on a Saturday, or attend a training on a Friday. That's unacceptable. We believe as professionals, you need to be able to plan your year. So the 7 student-free days are those days that will be set aside now for you to be attending those training. And we have told Ministry of Education they need to inform you by early next year what those days will be. So it will be 3 days before the new year begins. 2 days in each of the second and third terms. So that amounts to 7. So you'll know exactly, on such and such a date, I need to attend training. So you can plan your life. You don't get told 2 days or 2 weeks before, whatever the case is. So this is what I'm talking about for professional development activities at school and district level. So 3 days prior to term 1, 2 prior to each of terms 2 and 3. At the school or the district level, that's when you have the training. And of course, this is done by countries like Australia, New Zealand, Finland, etc., where they have the student-free days. when it's focused on your professional development, and you can plan ahead for this. It also allows, for example, you may require training in respective areas. You may actually ask for that, and training can be given in those areas too. Sorry, just go back to that. Have I missed that? Okay, no, it's fine. Next one. Okay, contracts. What's the story with contracts? Let me dispel some of the myths. The regulation says that contracts in the civil service can be given up to 5 years. What we have said at a administrative level, we've told the Ministry of Education, two groups of professions in the civil service. Nurses and teachers must be given 5-year contracts. And upon the end of the contract, you actually get an automatic right of renewal because of the profession that you are in. Now, of course, in the meantime, if, for example, this lady's got a position and 3 years into a contract, she actually applies for a position that's a different position to what she has. If she gets the job, then her contract starts from there for another 5 years. Okay? So teachers and nurses, let me tell you emphatically, you have an automatic right of renewal at the end of your contract. Okay? Unless, of course, like I said, you spend your time in the grog bowl, you're smoking with the students, you're having party with the students, whatever it is. Those things are reviewable, and that may actually affect your employment. But should you not do anything untoward, you have an automatic right of renewal. Now, already, there's a lot of talk about, I saw in the media and I saw other people making comments, even prior to this, 70% of all the civil servants in any case were on contracts. So only 30% actually weren't on contracts. Those people have continued to stay within the system. Now, again, like I said, there's of course nothing to fear in respect of termination in accordance. Any termination has to be in accordance with the discipline guidelines. So discipline guidelines says that you must have natural justice. If, for example, there's a complaint, we believe that you need to be dealt with under the contract, you have to go through the modes of natural justice. And of course, if at the end of the day you're still happy, for example, if you do get terminated, you still have a right to actually appeal. And if you're not happy, you can actually go to the Employment Relations Tribunal. If you're not happy with that, you can go to the High Court of Fiji. So you have all the appeal processes available to you. None of that is actually shut out. Now, the contract, of course, confirms the shift in the remuneration. It's not just simply about the pay rise. Okay? So it confirms that. Now, is what you have been given, what you call the contract, before you sign it, it's an offer. There's no pressure for you to sign it. You don't want to sign it, that's fine, you just don't get the pay rise. You stay on the salary that you are at. That's fair? But we'd rather you sign the contract because we can then give you the pay rise. It also protects you. In fact, yesterday in Nasori, somebody asked me a question. They said, what assurance do you have, even though I may sign the contract, what assurance can you give me that my salary won't decrease next year? I said the contract. It's a legally binding document. The contract quite specifically and categorically states the amount of salary you'll receive. So if, for example, somebody unilaterally decides to do that, it's enforceable. You are legally entitled to that salary and the terms and conditions that are stipulated in the contract. So it also protects you. Okay? Now, if you, just getting back on the point, as it says in Jane, we'll also talk about this. If, for example, you do not sign the contract, you stay on the salary on which you are, but you will then have to fit in with the level of responsibility which must match your salary. As you know, the levels of responsibility gets affected by the salary rates that you get paid. So Jane will talk a bit more about that. Okay, as I mentioned to you, we have Ministry of Education as a bit of a problem ministry in respect of the enforcement of the contracts. There has been some problems with it. For example, they've included rules for contracting the effective date. The effective date is the beginning of first pay that commences in the month that the contract is signed. It's paid according to the fortnight. Okay? Unfortunately, the Ministry of Education staff, without necessarily checking, assume that all contracts will start on the 1st of August. It doesn't. It starts from the date that you sign the contract. And so they've had to retract and reissue contracts. School-based staff ending at term end or school year end that I talked about. So your contracts must end at the end of the term or the beginning of the term, whatever the case may be. Cannot end in the middle of the term. So they need to specifically look at that. Similarly with people who are retiring at the age of 55. As I said, duration not to exceed 5 years, but it'll be up to 5 years. Again, it says contract renewal, automatic renewal. No school-based positions advertised if performance is acceptable. So when we say school-based, meaning all of you who are teachers. Of course, the people who sit in the head office who are administrators, they're different kettle of fish. They're dealt with quite differently. And this is already, of course, the practice. School-based positions not subject to the requirement for advertising or an expiry. It is very interesting. I went to the Ministry of Education corporate workshop, and some of the education officers were saying to me, they're saying, hang on, some of these principals and head teachers will actually get paid more than me. Why should they get paid more than me? Because we are the ones supervising them. We should get paid more than them. I said, no. The way the system works is this. The person who may be an SOE, who comes to work, he or she has got nobody to supervise. They simply come to work and sit at the desk. The head teacher may have 800 students screaming in the morning. They may have 15 teachers to deal with. They have to do the day-to-day issues. So the level of responsibility that you have is reflected in your salary. So just because I'm going to supervise or be the administrative arm of you, doesn't mean I should get paid more than you. In fact, most permanent secretaries get paid more than the ministers. It does not mean that the ministers cannot make policy decisions, because it's on the level of responsibility. The chief accounting officer of any ministry is the PS. If something goes wrong with the accounts and the finances, it's the permanent secretary that's held responsible. If something goes wrong with the contracts, it's not the minister responsible, it's the PS. So the level of responsibility is higher. In the same way, if you're a teacher or a head teacher, vice principal, your level of responsibility is a lot higher than a person who may be simply an administrative officer. The same argument we've had, and I've made this comment also, that there seems to be a mindset in the administrative arm of the ministry that they need to poach from the teaching cadre for the administrative arm. So they said to me, well, hang on, if the salaries are going to be higher for the teaching cadre and not for the people in the head office, none of them will want to come and work in the head office. And I said, yeah, they shouldn't. Why do you want to cannibalize from the teaching profession? These people are trained to teach. That's their passion. They don't necessarily want to become administrative officers. Of course, a lot of people did do that in the past because it meant a pay rise. Right? Generally. Because in Fiji, in the civil service, we went after titles. We go after titles. Because going after title means a pay rise. This new system does not mean you're going to be after titles. It means you'll be after performance. Because you will see, and Jane will explain also, that once we get this base right for your salaries, then on a yearly basis you have performance management systems in place. You'll be assessed individually in respect of your performance, and then you are able to move in that pay scale, that grade, a lot more frequently. Those of you who've been given a promotion or in the past, whenever you see that you get your salary, they always peg you at the lower end. Very little time or very little opportunity to move within the grade. And even when you move within the grade, it's only a difference of, $200-300 here and there. This actually gives you more opportunity. So as I know people, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, they don't want to become a head teacher. They don't want to become a deputy head teacher or vice principal. They love science. They have the passion, for example, for teaching science. They've been there for 20 years. That's their passion. But they're still saying that, but they're able to get the increases. Not all of you want to become a head teacher, I assume, but some of you may want to become a head teacher under the old system because you simply want a pay rise. Okay, that's how the system has worked. So we're now giving more opportunity to move within the bands themselves. Okay, the PS has also agreed, and we want this to happen also, is that, this is the performance assessment. So when I talked about performance assessment, we are developing the performance assessment. It's not out yet. So we've got a team working, the World Bank, and you'll know beforehand what is the criteria of your assessment. So somebody said, will I be assessed on the percentage of pass? Not necessarily. That could be one issue, but not the entire issue. You may actually be bringing up a school that previously had people failing all the time. So some people now may be actually, going up just above 50%. You may be teaching at a school that's got no electricity. Your challenges that you face is different. So you may be able to bring those people up to a particular level that is a lot more remarkable than ever before. So there are different forms of criteria, so that's being developed. So once that is developed, that will actually be made known to all of you. So you will then actually know what are you being marked against or based against. See, this problem about assessing you purely based on pass marks or the percentage of passes, we know now that in some schools, some teachers and also the principals or head teachers, principals in particular, they see somebody who they think may fail, they said, you get out of the system, go to a technical college. Right? So it will affect our pass rate. That's not right. Because unfortunately, the system is making you do that. There may be some students actually with a bit of coaching from you, with a bit of assistance from you, they can actually pass too. And they may not necessarily want to go to a technical college. They want to do your normal mainstream school. So the performance system will actually enable a broad range of criteria. For example, things like student attendance, the learning outcomes, literacy rates, numeracy rates. How is that? There are some schools where people in class 8, they cannot write one sentence. It is happening. So maybe that's one of the assessments, literacy and numeracy. So that will come out. Of course, then once you are assessed, you are not happy with the assessment, you can actually appeal it too. So the grounds for appeal. I know in the Solicitor General's office, when they do the assessment, if you, for example, are a senior lawyer, your subordinates or the people who report to you, they assess you also. And the person who sits above you, they also assess you. So you get assessed from top and down. And of course, there are other criteria too. They've already implemented that. And then, of course, the results will confirm movement up in the steps in the salary bands and pay increases with the budget cycle. And of course, affects your renewal of contracts. Okay. Now, I wanted to, you've got this with you. Thank you. Oh, man. Shit, I've got my teeth. I wanted to tell you, I really need some water. Where are my guys here? These guys have disappeared. Wait. Now, as you know that the salaries have all gone up. Okay? So, if you were on, I can't read this, sorry. Bernie, can you get them to get my other glass, please? Sorry about this. I'm going a bit blind, so you need to bear with me. So this band, what's the first one called? Sorry? ED8A, okay? You're currently on, before the increment, you're $20,230. Now, at the $16,000 income tax threshold, you pay a tax of $296. So your gross, so your take-home pay after FNPF is $19,933. Okay? You have now gone up from $20,000 to $22,000. At $16,000 threshold, you pay $522 tax. After tax, you take home $22,045. So you have an increase of $2,101. However, there's more. Because we have now, because now you no longer pay tax until you earn $30,000. It's better. So you got the $22,567. Because you no longer pay tax, your actual take-home pay has gone up by $2,600. So it's not only about the pay rise, but it's also because of the income tax threshold has gone up to $30,000. Please also understand this. It's not only people who earn less than $30,000 who've actually had a tax benefit. Everybody's had a tax cut. Because the way the tax system works is this. When you increase the income tax threshold to $30,000, you cannot have a huge jump. It's a graduated jump. So, I'll give you an example. A person at this bottom end who was earning $42,000, paid tax of $4,100, had a take-home pay of $38,000. Now that $42,000 person has jumped up to $67,000. That's the pay rise. Okay? $67,000. At $16,000 tax threshold, they will pay $9,000 tax. Take-home pay is $58,000. A salary increase of $20,000. But because the tax rates have overall come down, they actually pay now tax of $7,100 instead of $9,026. So the salary increase is actually $22,000. What I should say is a take-home pay. You take $22,000 more in your pocket home. So all of you have actually had more money coming into your pocket apart from the salary increase because of the tax deductions. So please understand that in real terms. That is what actually is happening. And that money should be coming to your account once, of course, you sign the contract. I've done some other comparisons. If the tax threshold was 6,500, 8,400. Next one, please. And this is Jane. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have to introduce you to Jane. Jane Curran is from Australia. We don't hold it against her. But she actually came to Fiji when we were setting up the Fijian Elections Office. Those of you who know about the Elections Office, before it was called the Supervisor of Elections Office, it was only resourced whenever elections took place. So they would poach people, set up the office. When the elections finished, everybody went to wherever they came from. But to have an internationally compliant elections office, you need to have full-time staff. So the elections office did not have any HR systems in place. So Jane came to us through DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, actually funded her to come to Fiji. And because she did such a fantastic job, we then asked her to stay on to carry out the OMRS and the Job Evaluation Discipline Guidelines. And so she's here with us and she's doing a fantastic job. Please put your hands together for Jane. And she'll now take you through the job evaluation exercise and how they came up with that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. So my part of the session, I will run through some of the issues that we've had with the ministry in relation to job evaluation. By now you're seeing a pattern. There have been a few issues with headquarters. But we want to be open about why some of the delays have occurred. I'll explain how the evaluations work, the factors that are considered, and then how the salary bands were created because they were two separate exercises, and then of course what it means for you. So we'll start with the issues with the ministry. So first of all, we started the dialogue back in about January talking about how can we group the schools, because at the moment you have 29 separate salary scales, the ED scales, and we knew that we were going to be moving on to broad bands. At that stage we didn't know how many, but we knew that there would be far fewer and that they would apply across the civil service. So we started asking the question, how do we group the schools together? Is it by enrolment? Is it by number of teachers? Is it by other staffing aspects, like number of vice principals or assistant head teachers in the school? And I have to admit that it's one of those situations, I'm sure you've all been in it, where I would ask a question and I would get an answer, and then I would realise that they hadn't understood the question. So I would ask a different question and I would get a different answer, and then I would realise that they still hadn't understood the question. And then we thought that we'd understood each other and it turned out we hadn't, so we had to go back and do it again. So we understand each other now. We have come up with the breakdown of how the schools can be grouped together, but it took a little bit longer than we expected because of some of the misunderstandings and lack of information from the ministry. So the bands are now confirmed. We did do a review of some of the jobs right at the end, particularly assistant head teachers, vice principals and education officers. education officers for the reasons that the Minister mentioned, because they were trying to say that they should be above the head teachers and the principals, and the assistant head teachers and vice principals, because previously the levels were based on the size of the school, and now they're all on the same bands. So I'll explain that when I go through the factors as to why that happens. Then there was a lot of work in CSRMU to come up with that snapshot, the double-sided sheet that doesn't fit on a slide, to map each of your individual scales over to the new bands, because it's quite complex in education. When we did this in tranche 1 for the admin jobs, it was a lot easier. We could say, okay, all SSO2 positions go to the same band. But here it's not that simple. Not all the ED8As went to the same band. Okay? Some went to one band and some went to another, and I'll explain why as we go through. So I mentioned about district office and headquarters. They wanted to be moved up through the bands, but it doesn't come through in the evaluation, and I'll explain why when we go through the factors. And I think it confirms also, as the Minister mentioned, the core business of education is in the schools. Okay? The service delivery, which is a huge focus about the reforms, it's not just about improving terms and conditions. That's important, but that's a means to an end. The end is improving service delivery. So just a little bit more background. As with all of the reforms, there is a guideline. So all of the reforms get their legal authority through these guidelines. The guideline was approved by the Public Service Commission in January this year, and it's on the Public Service Commission website. All of the guidelines are on the Public Service Commission website. They go up as soon as they're approved. It is a fundamental change. It is a move to position-based pay. And for education, that's a bigger change than it is in a lot of other parts of the civil service. So that when we evaluate jobs, it means that we look at the person and the position quite separately. So job evaluation is very much about the position. Performance assessment is about the person. So the different elements that have been talked about this morning, job evaluation is how we determine what level the position goes on. Open merit is how we select the person for the person to go into the job. And performance assessment is how we assess that person once they're in the job. Okay? So they're quite different activities. So the jobs are evaluated and placed on the bands, and the bands are therefore determined by the criteria or the requirements of the job. Qualifications are only one of the factors that are considered, and I'm going to go through all of the factors with you in the presentation. There are a couple of assumptions that need to be understood with job evaluation. Competence. The first one is that because we're not evaluating the person in the job, when we evaluate the job, we assume that whoever then goes into the job will be competent and will be able to perform the job. We know that that's not always the case, but that should not change the band of the position. So the position is evaluated based on an assumption that whoever occupies it will have the skills and be able to do the job. The second one is around workforce management. This means that we assume that the ministry or the employer has correctly divided up the work and that it is fairly distributed. So if job evaluation does not look at volume of work. Volume of work is a separate issue, and we know that it is an issue, but it can't be dealt with through job evaluation. It needs to be dealt with through a couple of other studies that are coming that the Minister will talk about in terms of restructuring the ministry and looking at things like class sizes and other staffing ratios. It can't be dealt with through job evaluation because volume really, when I go through the factors, you'll see it doesn't come into the factors. Okay, it's more about responsibility rather, it's about what you do, not how much you do. Okay? So there are 10 factors in the methodology that has been selected. There are a number of different methodologies available. The one we went out to tender and the one that was selected is called SP10 because there are 10 factors. It's run by a company called Strategic Pay who's based in New Zealand, and they partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers here in Fiji. So these types of methodologies, other international companies are Mercer and Hay, so they're internationally recognised. It is not a science, it is a methodology. There is judgment required when you apply the factors. So the 10 factors have different weightings And there's a lot of research that goes into what the weightings of the different factors are, and it really depends, it's how they impact on the requirements of the job, how the job is performed. The first one is education. So education, the factor is around what is required for the job, not the qualification that is held by the person. And this is a big change in education. In the past, particularly classroom teachers, it was about whether you had a diploma or a degree. In position-based pay, it's about the position. Are you a primary teacher or a secondary teacher, or a trade teacher or an early childhood teacher? If the person holds a qualification that is higher than that is designated for the job, that is not factored into job evaluation, because we're not evaluating the person, we're evaluating the job. That higher qualification should lead to higher performance, and therefore it should come through, that higher performance will come through in your performance assessment, but not just on the fact that you hold the qualification, on your performance, on how you use that piece of paper and the knowledge that you got from it in your classrooms or in your job.
I'll give you an example. To become a lawyer in Fiji, you don't need to do a master's in law. You need to do a degree, you need to do a PDLP, and you get admitted to the High Court of Fiji. Now, just because some lawyer has, after doing the degree, decided to go and do a master's, it does not mean that somehow or the other they have a higher level of admission. They won't. There are some people, for example, who have masters in law, but they're actually terrible lawyers. And the person who's actually got only a degree is a good lawyer. In the same way, the requirement, excuse me, the current requirement for primary school teacher is a diploma in teaching. But somebody comes along with, say, a degree, does not mean that the person with the degree in teaching is a better teacher than the teacher with a diploma. Yep. Some teachers I know have gone off and decided on their own to do an MBA. Great for you, but is it a job requirement? Does that mean you, just because you've done an MBA, that the person who's not got an MBA, that they should get less than you? No, it depends what Jane is saying. It depends on the requirement of the job. Okay?
Thank you, sir. So, just to pick up on that, so the Ministry has specified the requirements for classroom teachers. The requirement for a primary teacher is a diploma. The requirement for a secondary teacher is a degree. And therefore, they come out in different places on the bands. Now, I'm going to let you argue that amongst yourselves, okay? Primary and secondary, I have a long history with education. I had almost 20 years with education in Queensland. Primary and secondary never agree over those elements, so we're not going to debate them here, okay? I'll just go back to the point that it is the requirement for the position. That's not to say that we don't encourage you to do higher qualifications, because they do benefit you in your performance, and that's where they will be assessed. Okay. So the next factor is experience, and again it's the experience that is required to competently perform the job. It is not the number of years of service that the person who filled out the questionnaire might have at the time that they filled out the questionnaire. That is how they were written, but that's not what it's supposed to be. Okay. So some jobs, the experience requirement, say a driver, a general pool driver in a ministry, the experience requirement is 3 to 6 months. Okay, you come in and you learn the systems and then you're fully competent because you've already got a licence. But for a teacher, of course, it's much longer than that. And for a head teacher or a principal, it's longer again. So there are obviously different scores for the different experience requirements. It's not necessarily the same as what's stated in the job description when we advertise, and that's where it gets confusing for people. But it is what we assess the job on. It's the minimum that we say that you need in order to be competent. Complexity is about the level of predictability in the job. So some jobs are very predictable. You know from day to day that you're going to do the same thing every day. You come to work, you process some vouchers or you make some payments, and you know that that's what you're going to do every day. Other jobs I describe as you walk through the door in the morning and it's a new and exciting adventure every day and you don't know what to expect. Okay? So those different types of complexities have different scores. How predictable the job is. Okay? Scope. Scope is directly related to education and experience. So a lot of these factors link together, and the methodology itself gets punched into a very complex spreadsheet with lots of formulas behind it, and if they don't match, it sends out an error message and says, well, you've got a very high qualification requirement, but you've got a very low scope. So scope is about how much control you have over staff and resources. How much control do you have over your day-to-day work? Does someone direct you every minute of the day, or do you have a lot of control over what you do for yourself? Problem solving is how much judgment is required when you perform your duties. Some jobs, there's not very much judgment at all. There's quite clear rules, and this is, you can see how they start to link together. If it's very predictable, there's usually normally very clear rules, and there's not much scope for changing anything. So problem solving, how available are the rules and guidelines when you do your work? And yes, you have curriculum and you have a certain timetable that you teach to, but within that, you have to work out how it happens. Okay? So you have a certain amount of problem solving that you have to do within your daily work. Freedom to act is the extent to which there is supervision or guidance in your daily work. This is one of the factors that directly impacted on the outcome for, say, vice principals and assistant head teachers as opposed to principals and head teachers. The final decision maker in the school is the principal or the head teacher. So in terms of freedom to act, an assistant principal, a vice principal, an assistant head teacher always has a principal right there, or a head teacher, because they're the ones who are in charge. Okay. So there's a different score, same with a couple of those others. So it doesn't matter whether it's a small school or a big school, there's still a principal or a head teacher in charge. Okay. The impact of decisions, again assuming competence, assuming that you know what you're doing, what is the impact on the organisation of the decisions that you make? Can you make or break the organisation on the decisions that you're making? Assuming even if they're right. Interpersonal skills is about the nature and degree of contact with personnel, clients and other stakeholders. So we look at two things with this, whether the people are internal or external to the organisation, and then the type of contact. So like a receptionist, for example, has lots of contact with people outside the organisation, but it's at what we call an interact and serve level. So they take their questions and they direct them onto someone else. Okay? Obviously that's not what it's like. For teachers, you have lots of contact with external people and you're usually explaining things, justifying things. At the principal or head teacher level, they might be persuading them to take a particular course of action. Okay? At higher levels, like the PS's level, they're negotiating policy. So that's the different types of levels in interpersonal skills. Authorities is the formal authority of the position to spend money and hire or fire staff. And again, this is one of the ones that impacts on, say, the principal as opposed to the vice principal, because if there's any delegation, it's normally only to the principal or the head teacher. It normally doesn't go under that. And same with management of staff. If it goes to the school level, it normally doesn't go under the principal or the head teacher. And the last one is people management, supervision and management of staff. So this is where the number of teachers in the school comes into the factors. We can't factor enrolment. There's no way in the methodology to straight factor enrolment. But enrolment directly links to the number of staff in the school, and the number of staff is factored into this part of the evaluation, the people management. So larger schools, of course, get a bigger score, smaller schools get a smaller score. Okay. And that's how we came up with the groupings for the different schools. So at some point we had to draw a line and say, well, how do we group the schools based on the number of staff in the school? And I'll come to that in a moment. So that's one side of the coin, that's the job evaluation. That was how we came up with the points that put the jobs onto the bands. The other side of the coin is how did we assign the money to the bands, because that's a separate exercise. And they were done completely independently. The job evaluators, when they were doing the evaluations on the jobs, did not know the dollars that were attached to each of the bands, because we wanted an independent evaluation of the jobs. So the bands, you all have a copy of the bands. I keep losing my copy, I keep leaving it with people. So it looks like this one. Again, doesn't really fit on a slide, so that's why you have a hard copy. So there are 15 broad bands with A at the bottom and O at the top. And by the end of this exercise, all jobs in the civil service, regardless of whether you are an accounts officer, a teacher, a nurse, an engineer, a surveyor, a lawyer, everyone fits onto those bands. They are quite broad. There will be no more of the old occupational salary scales. So the ED, the AC, the AU, etc. are all going through this exercise. And that's part of what we say when we say it's a fundamental change to the way we remunerate. Okay? It's not just a salary increase, it's quite a big change to the whole process. The salary bands are benchmarked to the private sector. This has been announced many times over probably at least the last 12 months. It is the midpoint of each band, so step 4, that is benchmarked to the private sector. When we say benchmark to the private sector, we've undertaken a whole range of research to come up with some benchmark data about what salaries are paid in the private sector. So the first survey that was done was the Benchmark Compensation Survey, started at the end of 2015, and we got the results midway through 2016. So that was conducted by the World Bank. They collected a sample of job descriptions from the public sector. They went to the private sector and said, can you give us some comparable jobs and tell us what you pay for these jobs? That was the Compensation Benchmark Survey. Then, because there's not much of a private sector for teachers and nurses, we asked for a separate report from the World Bank where we asked them to look at teachers and nurses in other countries, not with a view to what they're actually paid, but with a view to looking at what occupations got paid similar amounts to them. Okay? So we're saying in Australia, for a teacher, what other occupations get paid a similar amount? So not the dollar amount, but the occupation. So then we had that report. Then when we tendered for the job evaluation methodology, because it was strategic pay and PricewaterhouseCoopers, we also have their salary survey data. PricewaterhouseCoopers does an annual salary survey in Fiji where they look at how much each job across a range of occupations is paid. And they also use the same job evaluation methodology, so they can actually say, well, for this number of points in the job evaluation, this is what the private sector is paying on average, because of course it's across a range of jobs. So all of that data together was put together to form the midpoint. The complicating factor was that when we started to look at constructing the bands, we had a cabinet decision that said we're aiming for across the board average 75%. That was based on the original World Bank report. But when we looked at Band A, for example, we were already paying 100% of the private sector, so we're not going to want to take it back to 75%. So the decision was made to have a sliding scale. So at the bottom at Band A, the scales are 110% of the private sector. At the top, they're about 60. The overall average is 94%. So in the middle of the bands, we're sitting on 100% of the private sector. Okay? But it's on a sliding range. We're above the private sector at the bottom and below the private sector at the top. like I said before, after the jobs were evaluated, so the bands were developed, the jobs were evaluated, they went on to the band, the salary got applied according to that band. So which bands did positions in education move to? So this is the snapshot that you have, the double-sided page, this one, that also doesn't fit on a slide. Okay. So based on all of those factors, all primary classroom teachers moved to band E. Secondary teachers moved to band F. A lot of that is about the qualification requirement, okay, because there's a lot of weight on the qualification requirement. All assistant head teachers in primary moved to band G. All head of department and assistant principals in secondary moved to H. And then we start with the principals and head teachers. So the groupings, you remember I said that we had a lot of discussion about how we were going to group the schools, and the definition of small, medium and large is on the bottom of the second page of the snapshot. So in primary, a large primary school is one with more than 25 teachers, and they move to band J. A medium primary school is one with 1 or 2 assistant head teachers and up to 25 teachers. So it doesn't matter whether they've got 1 or 2 assistant head teachers, either or, and up to 25 teachers. And a small primary school is one with no assistant head teacher. In secondary, the large secondary schools are those with more than 50 teachers. They move to band L. A medium secondary school is one with between 26 and 50 teachers, and a small secondary school has less than 26 teachers. So those of you who know the old ED scales much better than I ever will be thinking, oh, so some of them go here and some of them go here, and yes they do, and that's why it's such a complicated snapshot to show you where they all go. So the movement of the position is based on those groupings and the evaluation. Okay? So for you, what happened to you in this system? So the position has moved. Remember we said that you and your position are separate. Okay? So the position has moved. In transition, you as an individual go to the step on the band that provides the biggest increase up to 15%. If there is no step on that new band that gives an increase that's up to 15%, that's when the position has to be advertised. So if the increase for your substantive position is over 15%, that's where the position has to be advertised, and that's what the Minister was talking about before. That should be clear in the snapshot, because you can have a look for your old grade, you will see where it goes, you'll see the percentage says, oh, 50%, oh, okay, that means my position's going to be advertised. Beside that is another band. That is the new substantive band. That is the band that will be given to you in your contract. It is your safety net, because you will act in your current post until the open merit process is completed. That band on the right-hand side is the one that says if you don't win the post, this is the position that you go back to at that band, which is also a salary increase over your current salary. So everybody, regardless of whether the position is being advertised or not, you will still receive a salary increase. Those of you who are remaining acting in your current positions then get an acting allowance on top of that, at 95% of that new salary. Okay? So after transition, for people who are not affected by all of this redeployment, the question is, well, how do I get from, if I'm currently on step 2, how do I get up through the steps, or is this my new step forever like it was on the old scales? The movement is based on the performance guideline, which, as the Minister mentioned, we haven't finalised yet. We're currently working on this. As soon as this is finished, we will finalise the performance guideline. Your score in the performance guideline will determine how you move through the steps. It's not based on time, it's based on performance. Okay. The midpoint, step 4, is also called the competence step, so it's the one that we benchmark to the private sector. It's also called the competence step. It's the step where we expect most people to sit if they're fully performing the whole range of duties of the job. Steps 5, 6 and 7 are for people who do a lot more than the requirements of the job. Not talking volume, I'm talking performance. Okay. Steps 1, 2 and 3 are for people who are newly appointed into jobs. So the new graduates, they're not going to start on step 4, they'll start on step 1 or 2, and then when their performance is assessed, they will move up through the steps. Okay. So I talked a little bit about the advertising and redeployment. So anything that's over 15% has to be advertised. The ministry is working on a timetable for this. We're working on it with them. So it's important to understand, a lot of people have said, but I've been in my job for a really long time and I'm really good at it. Why are you advertising the job? Okay. The short answer is that there's no formal system to confirm who's doing a good job and who's not. Okay. We know that there's lots of reports out there saying that people are doing a good job, but then we know that there's complaints against those same people saying that they're not doing a good job. So we don't have a formal system that's robust enough to justify paying someone sitting in a job a 50% increase or a 40% increase. So those jobs are all going to be advertised. For open merit competition, you have a safety net, as I said, okay, that still gives you a salary increase. The ministry should have, and in most instances has, issued the contract and the acting letter together. Okay, so when you received your contract, it would have been at that lower band, and then you would have received an acting letter. We are aware that the contracts provide a school, and it's a school that you may not have any interest in going to, and a couple of people said to me today that they don't even know where the school is. So the ministry was not supposed to put a school onto those contracts. You will get another letter from the ministry saying that your substantive contract is at this band, with a school to be determined after completion of the open merit process. Okay? So if they've sent you somewhere that you can't, won't, don't want to go to, that's not a reason to not sign the contract. There will be a letter coming as a supplement to that contract. Okay, so they won't reissue the contract. They will issue a letter, a variation saying ignore the school. It's to be advised. That's right. The period of acting. So we also know that the acting letters, a lot of them are only through till November. The ministry has been advised to reissue the acting letter because it is supposed to go until the open merit is completed. So we know that there'll be a timetable. There'll be one group of jobs where we expect people to take up duty in April next year, and there'll be another group of jobs where we expect them to take up in August next year. So you're acting depending on which group the position falls into. When the recruitment plan is finalised, your acting will go to either April or August next year, and your acting letter will be amended accordingly. And yes, that includes the holidays. It will go across the holidays. And that's it for me. Back to you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, I again have to apologize for this. Unfortunately, like I said in the beginning, the ministry has goofed up on a number of levels. So what Jane has clarified again, those acting positions do not end until a substantive position or until somebody has been appointed on a substantive position in that particular role. So some of you may actually act and become very good actors until the second term of next year. Some of you may act until April of next year. So please be reassured of that. And that's the mistake the Ministry of Education made. This is why we are playing an active role. The CSRMU, just for information, sits within the Ministry of Economy. The Ministry of Civil Service is a separate ministry. Reform is done by this unit. The Ministry of Civil Service actually provides for ongoing training, etc., and other delivery of government services for the civil service. And they also act as a secretariat for the PSC. Now, as I mentioned, the administrative arm of the Ministry of Education needs to be reviewed. Your district education officers, your senior education officers, and what people do in the head office, they've been doing these things. Essentially, it's a colonial inheritance, the whole structure. And they've just built upon it. And nobody's ever really reviewed it. So we are getting it reviewed. And in fact, that's commencing in September. So it'll look at, review the headquarters, divisional district service provisions, and resulting staffing requirements. Whether we need so many district education officers, whether we need so many senior education officers, what is their role? How should they interact with you? Should they play such a dominant role over you as the professional teachers? Those are the kind of things that will be looked at through this particular review process. So as we said, the focus should be on the core business, which is the teaching provision to all our students. We also are getting, and I'm sure many would agree with this, we're getting a separate review done through the World Bank, looking at things like teacher-student ratios, or student-teacher ratios, whichever way you want to look at it. Because there are too many students being taught by one teacher, generally speaking. Now, over the past 3 or 4 years, every year we have been increasing the number of teacher numbers in Fiji. I think last year there was about 200 teachers for primary, and I think another 50 or 100 for secondary. Yet it is still not enough. So what is really the benchmark? There are some schools today, the entire school from class 1 to 8 has about 87 students. This is the entire primary school, class 1 to 6. Of course, then we have Rishikul that has 1,600 students. So you know how you have small, medium, large schools, there should be an extra large school. Okay? So we are going to go through that process. So like we said to you, our emphasis is not just only about things like salary increases, but also looking at the environment that we provide for you to be able to deliver your professional skill set. You can spend a bit more time on the students that need that attention also. That's very, very important. So there's going to be a report on the class size, staffing ratios, research on that, identify other areas. Should we, for example, how many assistant head teachers we should have? We know at the moment there's a lack of uniformity. Some schools actually have 2 assistant head teachers. Others with a bigger roll number actually don't have even 1, or have only 1. So all of that we need to have a uniform approach to that. That'll actually give you more confidence in respect to the teaching environment. And of course, we need to review the roles of the vice principals. This is supported by World Bank. World Bank actually has done a lot of this throughout the world in various wonderful and weird parts of the world, and they bring a lot of wealth of experience with them. So that work will commence before the end of 2017. So some of these reforms will actually spill over into next year. So you'll see a continuing improvement in the teaching environment for you. Next, please. I talked about student-free days, the professional development, etc. Next one, please. Now, CSRMU actually also conducts information sessions. Watch out for announcement FEMIS and in the papers. We can do that for you. The Ministry of Civil Service is actually building up its capacity for training. Now, again, using our teacher friend as an example, if she wants to go and apply for a senior position, now she says, I actually want to do really well. Maybe I need to set out my CV in a more professional manner. Maybe I need to know how to perform in my interview. We actually provide the training for you through the Ministry of Civil Service. You want the training because we want all of you to compete with each other. When you all compete with each other on a level playing field, eventually when somebody gets the job, you know, okay, that person actually deserved the job because it's done through an independent process. So, you don't have people trying to undermine each other. There's a lot of that politics that goes on. You'd be surprised the kind of Viber messages I get from teachers. And that does happen quite a lot. So we want to instill that confidence. The Ministry of Civil Service actually does provide that level of training for you, and also in other areas. So if you wish that, you can also request that in your student-free days, and we can provide that training sessions for you. Is that it, Ben? Now, please take down this email address. This slideshow will also be put up on our website. I saw some of you taking a lot of notes. Please know that this slideshow will also be put up on our website, so you can go to it. But this email address, should you have any issues, whether it's related to your position or personal issue, related to your job, then you can actually send it to us. This email address is not accessible by the market. It's only about 2 or 3 of us. So you can write your personal issues regarding that. It's not going to go to the Ministry of Education saying that this person sent us an email. But please feel free to send your personal issues to that, and we can address it. Or should you have any queries after this, you want to raise it, if you do not understand it, you can also send it to that. As Jane has said, that the bands are available on the website and the Ministry of Economy website. We also will make this slideshow available to you next week. We are tomorrow in Savu in Lambasa. Once we get back to Suva, we will then be able to put up all of this on the website. I would now like to open up the floor for any questions or queries, but let me just very quickly summarize and address some of the key issues. One of the things that I did forget to mention is that I was quite astounded when I read in the media that one of the officials of the Fijian Teachers Association at the AGM said that if you get a contract, you cannot get bank loans. What utter nonsense. If you read the Fiji Sun the next day, they actually went and interviewed the CEO of ANZ. They spoke to Bread Bank, they spoke to other banks. There is nothing stopping you from getting a personal loan or a home loan from a bank just because you've got a contract. Okay? Before I took up this job, I had a 3-year contract for the people I worked with. In the private sector, I had 2 loans. So it's the norm. Even if you're the banks that you go to get a loan from, they all have contracts. In fact, they have 3-year contracts. So there's nothing stopping you. So that's a myth. So please understand that. You're eligible for loans when you go to banks. Number 2, you have a contract for 5 years. Your contracts are automatically renewed. Unless, of course, you do something untoward that is not expected of a professional teacher. That's number 2 myth that needs to be cleared up. Number 3, OMRS will be implemented thoroughly in the Ministry of Education. Number 4, the Ministry of Education has not been one of the high-performing ministries in respect of the administrative implementation of the OMRS. They have been slow. We accept that. We admit that. We also know, for example, they put in place a discipline board that was unconstitutional, and we've got rid of that. So all of these things, these are the facts. In respect of also going forward, you're going to have performance management systems put in place, where that will give you an opportunity to be able to get regular pay rises within the bands. Gives you more opportunity to also to stay within the preferred role that you want in the teaching cadre, and yet be able to be rewarded for it, rather than going around and looking for change in titles. Okay, that's number 5 now. Number 6, those of you who have increments of more than 15% of those positions, they will be advertised. You apply on an OMRS system. Some people who, for example, are getting more than 15%, they're saying, well, I've been in this position, why should I need to have my position advertised? Well, because you need to go through the OMRS system. But until such time, you are getting the new salary or 95% of it. So you're okay, you're still doing well. Now, assuming that you're a head teacher at the moment, and your position is advertised, or that position is advertised, and you apply for it, and you don't get it, you're not worse off, as Jane said. You still get the pay rise, but you don't necessarily have the title. Okay? So financially, you're not worse off. In fact, you're still better off, as long as you sign the contract. Now, the signing of contracts, it comes, the new pay comes into effect from the next 4th pay night after you sign the contract. Okay? These are the 4 key fundamental areas. Have I missed out on anything specifically? And of course, your pay rise is not just dependent on the pay rise that we've given you, but also because of the tax cut, you're actually taking more money home in your pocket. And we're also looking at other areas such as increasing the teacher-student ratio, looking at the environment in which you actually teach. We had a principal, acting principal in Nosori. He said, look, I'm very happy with it all, but can you please tell me when will I get more science equipment? And when will the libraries that I've, schools that I've taught, teaching, when will the libraries improve? So there are other sort of burning issues that some teachers feel very passionate about that. The contracts, of course, give you that legal ability to seek recourse should anybody deviate from that contract. In other words, those contracts are legally enforceable in a court of law and against the party that has actually signed that contract with you. We, of course, are carrying out a review of the ministry itself, in particular the administration. Not you, but the administrators, the people who administer you. We're going to change the culture, that those people need to see you as their clients, as opposed to you serving them. Need the mind shift. So that's number one. Number two, of course, is we need to look at whether the structure of the administration actually needs to remain the same in 21st century education sector in Fiji. The other thing, of course, as I mentioned, are things like the 7 student free days, which we'll be implementing, gives you better opportunity to plan your life, plan your holidays, plan when you want to go on a holiday, and also your professional training too. So with those few words, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now like to open up the floor. Please just put up your hands and or hand.